Not too long ago, I was on a physical red teaming engagement along with doing network attacks for a big customer of ours. And I bet you're all firstly laughing at this wonderful picture that I've drawn here. You've got a lovely lady and a lovely man, and these two are performing a red team. And in this video, we're going to cover all things physical access security controls, but I'd love to also continue my story. So not too long ago, I was on a physical engagement, and that all entails the physical access controls, whether it's doors, whether it's the physical component of laptops, of hardware, of switching infrastructure, servers, desktops, the whole kit and caboodle, right? So in this video, I want to cover some good practices, some hygiene, what do we look out for, and I want to spend the next 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes, depending on how long we go into this discussion, just covering all things physical access security controls. Now, I mentioned not too long ago I was on a physical engagement, and I've got a picture here where I pretty much got access to an executive leader's cubicle. And I'm just going to get my pen out here just so I can annotate. And the whole concept behind this engagement was me that I was able to, obviously we had a very specific rules of engagement that we could define who we could fish in this example, and then how we're going to get access to the room. So I kind of saw that there was a specific, cleaning facility team that was there, and now, mind you, we didn't have, months and months of prepping. This was kind of a spontaneous engagement where, I was on site for the day and I just sort of mentioned to the executive team, how about we run some physical components of the testing? And we all agreed to it. And obviously that was being signed off, and a very specific sort of remediation plan if anything does happen during the engagement. And the first part here that I sort of want to highlight is the physical access in terms of the building supplies, and I'll cover some more in the other component where we sort of dive into the countermeasures and stuff like that. But in this particular example, I had access to the whole cubicle by just impersonating to be a cleaner. Now you could see here that there's a file cabinet over there, which we've got access to highly sensitive information. There's some things that I've blurred out here in the background, which kind of just covers other documents and files and information that was available during the engagement. You can also see that the desk itself was also pretty clean. However, there was a file cabinet just underneath the desk, again, containing highly sensitive information. I'm just going to keep scrolling up. So there's the file cabinet that we had access to. Again, it had, keys, and it had information here. So the keys were on the actual file cabinets, which didn't take a genius to turn the key and get access to the information that was behind these file cabinets, again, which was highly, highly sensitive to the business. And should that information get out, would have caused quite of a disastrous situation. Here is another example of a user's desk. Now, this is why having a clean desk policy is a good thing. And on this desk, there was papers and documents of financial records, employee details, again, access to a cubicle, access to a file cabinet underneath a desk that had, again, more sensitive information. So again, you can see the repercussions against having these kinds of information widely available. Part of the assessment again was access to highly restricted areas where, again, the doors were not even closed correctly or not locked. We didn't have the ability to play with the specific HID vendor in this case to bypass any access controls. Again, this was more of a spontaneous event. We didn't have months and months of planning and doing recon to identify what technologies they would be using and how we're going to bypass the actual physical controls. This was not part of that engagement. So this again was just sort of the good Samaritan of friendliness that, we've had a good relationship with this customer. So we thought, look, let's just give you some value and help you along your security journey. So again, getting access to highly restricted areas just because the door was not locked. And in this particular one here, I was walking by a specific business unit, and I thought, let me go in there and see what I can get access to. And I pretty much impersonated the local IT team. And I said, look, I'm here to do some updates on some laptops. And it was, I think, around lunchtime. It was about 12:30 p.m. So I kind of knew people would be either going out to lunch or returning from lunch. It may be a bit of cruisiness. So long story short, I came out with a couple of credentials, and there's probably about two laptops here that I walked out with. And then I thought, as I was walking down here, I called the IT director and I said, look, are you okay if I've got two laptops here. These two users gave me the details along with their passwords, which are, labeled here. And I said, look, are you okay if I go back and do the rest of the room? I think all in all, there was about 30 people in that room. And yeah, sure enough, as I was walking out, it kind of just spurred to me. I said, look, if I can get two laptops, chances I can get the rest of the people's laptops as well. So I came back and this lady came to me and she said, "You're that IT guy, I just missed you." And I thought I was going to get in trouble. I thought she would have called the IT director, or she maybe escalated to the risk manager that was on site, the chief risk officer. And I thought she would have called that risk officer, and then she would have called me and said, "Look, we've got a big issue here and stuff like that." That did not happen. So the lady in that business unit came to me, and she still thought I was that IT help desk person. And then she said, "Look, I'm actually going to lunch. Would you like my details and the rest of our team's assets to update so that way when we come back from lunch, everything will be done?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I was pretty much walking out with 15 laptops in each hand, which, as you could imagine, was quite heavy. So I actually had to leave them there, come back and sort of take them, five at a time or whatever it was. And I would take them to the IT director's room and just be dumping piles of laptops with all credentials and pass notes like this, which would have the usernames and passwords for us to you know log into the systems. And now all these systems on these laptops were all very highly sensitive and highly I should say classified data that was involved with this team. And we had access to pretty much all their logins. So should this be in a malicious intent, we would have had, I was pretty much had everything within the first 5 minutes of that engagement, and I had about the 30 assets that I walked out with. So that was a big wake up call to a lot of the executive team there. So again, going back to our security controls on the best ways that we can manage and mitigate against this. So when we talk about security controls, the first thing that we need to think about is the physical access all around our buildings, both customers, on-site locations, etc. Right? It's that physical component, door locks, lifts, cubicles, comms rooms, lighting facilities that are placed around the area. So we'll cover this in just a moment. So as we sort of work our way this way, I think there's a couple of things that we should be considering when we're working through physical access security controls. And the first one is lighting, and ensuring there's adequate lighting in areas that could have potential information, right? We've got, reception areas where people are potentially coming into and being greeted, whether they're visitors and guests and stuff like that. We could have doors and other locations such as maybe access points as well in certain darker areas. So traditionally what would happen is we want to make sure that there's well lit areas, again, reception areas, server rooms, comms rooms, anywhere that there's power, phone lines, internet connectivity locations as well. Excuse me. So we've got places where we've got the MDF or the IDF, so the main distribution frame, where we've got, the segmentation between the service provider and the actual and obviously the service provider and the telecommunications provider in our building facilities, and things like that. So we want to deter those activities which would be less likely to happen should we not have effective lighting. So lighting should be a first area to ensure that there's specific areas have lighting. We can actually view and see, if anyone is trying to do anything that's malicious or, of an unwelcomed, unauthorized nature. So the other thing that I want to sort of touch on here as we continue moving down this little square paradigm here is reviewing visitor logs. And I've been on a couple of engagements where you're filling out bogus information on the visitor log and ensuring that the security controls of maybe the security admin person are reviewing visitor logs effectively and are doing them on a current basis. So usually you would look at your visitor logs on a daily basis, and that's usually at the end of the day, and make sure that no visitors have obviously been left on the premises where they shouldn't have been. they've had a couple of things, right? So let me just, as I'm continuing to draw this out, so there's a couple of three areas. Usually we've got a good form of identification. So either proper driver's license if we require that, or we know who they are, where they're coming from, which company they're coming from. No one's just walking in off the street, getting access to the building. Another good measure is they should be escorted. Now, you should have someone with them at all times. If they're there to see some other executive or another person within the team, they should be escorted pretty much most of the time and have someone around them to know their sort of movements and their whereabouts. And another measure is we should have a good qualification of badge placement. So whether it's a sticky label on their chest that says I'm a visitor, or a keychain around the neck that says I'm a visitor and I'm visiting, a visitor badge, basically that sort of says, and then that's the visitor badge should be then. I just want to expand the screen here just a little bit more. There we go. And then the badge component typically ties in with the culture. So the business should know that if no one is wearing a badge, or if it's a visible badge, let's say maybe the color coding is yellow is contractor, maybe blue is internal. So anyone that's wearing a yellow badge, people should identify that as maybe a contractor or maybe a third-party visitor. And if they have no banners around the collar, well then they should be probing someone from the blue to say, hey, you're not wearing a band, you're not wearing a lapel. Please, go back to reception or go back to the team, and then be escorted on, the definitive security controls of why they're not wearing badges and who they're here to visit. So making sure the culture is aware of that. Reviewing cameras. So if we've got cameras in places, things like, if we've got entry lobbies, or maybe we've got comms rooms. So maybe we have a bunch of routers and switches on a specific cubicle location. Cameras should be out there reviewing those contents daily. So we should be on there reviewing the information, reviewing the access basically into the building, right? The people, the power, the phones. If we've got specific areas, maybe conference rooms that maybe have sensitive information, we should be reviewing that both inside the facility and outside the facilities as well. And typically this is around doors that have or door areas or doors that lead to sensitive areas as well. As I mentioned before, they should all be covered by cameras. So maybe we've got cubicle entries. Maybe there's a specific executive area that should be videotaped at all time, and all that sort of stuff. So wiring closets is a big one. Each floor may have a specific comms cabinet, routers, switches, physical components, again, should be recorded. And then we should review that, review that recording regularly as well at the end of the day. Obviously being proactive against it and making sure that doesn't go unforeseen for too long. And as we get to the last two here, I'm going to talk about open spaces. And these are quite holistic across both open and closed. So when we talk about open and closed spaces, think about maybe the open plan seating arrangement that we have in the office versus things like maybe closed, like we've got a boardroom, something like a cubicle, etc. Right? And this is typically ensuring that obviously open spaces have prime targets, right? We've got people picking up things off the desks, as you saw in a previous previously where I walked into the facility and there was just documents and papers everywhere, right? We want to make sure that, again, there's a clean desk policy that's associated. I'm just going to put clean desk policy. And this helps ensure that there's no sensitivity of documents that just get left lying around. There's also a clear lockout policy. Now, sometimes people get a little bit iffy with their lockout policies, especially the executives, because if the machine locks out after 2 minutes, now I've got to log in again, right? So it becomes part of that process where we've got to incorporate security into the life cycle of the business. So ensuring, again, there's a lockout policy. If the computers are left unattended for small periods of time, then obviously they're going to lock, and then people can come back in, log in, and authenticate through the right processes. And then the same goes for our closed areas as well. So again, conference rooms, we've got, a different sort of attacks like the Dropbox attacks where we can plug in devices and then have out of bands access. And I'm just going to I'm going to switch my screen in just a moment as well, where we're going to talk about some of those types of attacks. So we've got the Dropbox attacks, and this is typically putting in a device into maybe a conference room facility and then having access to that through an out of bounds means. And then we've got access to our C2 channel here, and then we can control what we want to do with that machine, if that's in a meeting room or if that's in a cubicle facility or someone's desk and we've plugged it in. Again, there's a couple of countermeasures for this. So when we talk about countermeasures, and we've already talked about this before, is to make sure, number one, is we've got a separated network. So things are all segmented out correctly. Let me just clean that up a little bit. So our networks are all separated nice and neatly as well across the environment. And then the number two is the most important part is our unused ports. So should anyone walk into that meeting room or the cubicle and someone plugs something into that switch port, well, then the DPUs on that network should not be passed around. If I'm bringing in a physical switch to try and become the root of the King Kong environment, and then my BBDU will be a lower priority than the current switch, and then it causes a topology reconfiguration, and then you can start becoming and sending in those root bridges and stuff like that across the layer 2 network. If we're talking about that, or if I'm bringing in maybe a Dropbox device and I plug that in, well, chances are that should be in an unused port. And I spoke about the Blackpool VLANs. VLANs, and I spoke before about the native VLANs. So ensuring that the native VLAN from one has been removed. So let me just clean that up a little bit. So the native VLAN by default is 1 on a lot of switches. We should be changing that and changing the configuration. And again, moving unused ports that are not used on that current switch port and move them to a whole nother VLAN itself. So by default, then they should all move into a pooled VLAN of, let's say it's 999, and then everything in 999 goes pretty much nowhere. And then we basically administer and control who has access to that bit of infrastructure of that switch. So again, ensuring that that's obviously a good countermeasure or good prevention measure, and ensuring that no one can just plug in something to the switched environment and then getting access to something else. So I'm just going to sweep over to another screen in just a moment. And as we continue on our discussion, there's other things here that I just want to talk about as we continue down this physical security controls. So if you're familiar with Hack5 have great physical devices that allows us to do these things. So when we look at, I'm just going to get my pen here. When we look at the land turtle allows us to obviously physically plug in and then get our remote shell essentially. So again, if we've got a highly accessible area, maybe it's a cubicle area, we can plug this in, we can connect in and then configure these devices to do whatever we want them to do. Should it be physical connection back into that location, and then we can do recon and do port scanning and stuff like that. Then we've got our OMG cables. So we've got our detection cable to the right here, the actual plugs themselves, and then we've got the actual cables which we can perform attacks through iPhone charge lookalikes and other devices here to the right. And then we've got the actual stealthy devices as well. So these over here are actual screen crabs. So they're called a screen crab. And what they tend to do is they're basically a video man in the middle. So we can plug them into projectors or the back of like a monitor in a conference room, and then we can basically capture the video contents and obviously the information of the screen and the screen activity specifically of those devices. So doing a physical location stakeout as well, so ensuring that we may be going around the meeting rooms at the end of the day, looking behind the actual TVs, looking underneath the tables, making sure there's no devices like these that are displayed in those conference rooms should it be malicious intent. So that's pretty much it as we cover this video. I hope you've enjoyed this segment as we talk through all things physical access security controls. As always, thank you for viewing and see you all in the next video.